this episode of the Mama Podcast, we speak to Jarell Bempong, who is the CEO and founder of Bempong Talking Therapy. We discuss how to be culturally conscious and more considerate to others to make the world a better and happier place. We hope you are inspired as much as we are. So welcome, Jarell. It's fantastic to have you here. We obviously met on LinkedIn, and I absolutely loved all your LinkedIn posts, talking about culture consciousness and your insightful conversations. So tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, so really the core ethos of what I do is really about cultural consciousness. And cultural consciousness is the awareness of your own cultural identity. And when I say cultural identity, I'm not just talking about race or ethnicity. I'm talking about protected characteristics. What makes you you, those intersections of your identity. So, for example, I'm a Black, gay, dyslexic man, right? So that's four cultural identities. And I'm aware of that. I know that, and it's aware of that in yourself and the awareness of that in other people as well, and how those cultural identities interact and interplay with each other. So really, I have insightful conversations, which is meaningful conversations to help people become more aware of culture and just remove it away from just being race and ethnicity and looking at it as a broader sense so that we can have real inclusivity, equity, equality, and inclusion, right? So that's the basis of what I do. And it's really about allyship, you know, getting people on board on the mission and helping us understand that we all have our cultural identities where there's a dominant and maybe a subordinate or a marginalized identity within us ourselves, and is recognizing that to lift up marginalized voices as well.
So amazing. How can we help each other then? How can we be better allies?
So being better allies is really, and I'll give you an example. So even though I come from multiple, marginalized groups, so Black, obviously, we're massively marginalized in the UK and the West. Gay, I mean, I was told a few years ago that I'm allowed to marry. So if someone gave me permission to fall in love, which I find so bizarre, but there you go, and when it comes to neurodivergency as well, the world isn't built for neurodivergence. So we have to carve our own way out and think outside of the box, right? So within the marginalized, you can be marginalized within the marginalized, within the marginalized, till you fall into the cracks somewhere. But even within the marginalization, I recognize that I'm a man, right? And within society, it's a man's world currently, which it shouldn't be, but it currently is. So that's where my privilege lies. And privileges are things that are afforded to us without, we don't have a choice over it. So I didn't choose to have male privilege. It was just the way society is set up, and I have male privilege. Now, the question is, what do I do with that male privilege? So if I'm walking down the street at night and I see a woman walking alone in front of me, because of my male privilege, I'll cross the road, right? And that's a symbolic act of lifting marginalized voices through an action. I don't have to go and throw myself in front of a horse at the Royal Ascot to stand up for women's rights or women's equality, right? I can cross the road. That's something I can do in my own personal domain. It's a day-to-day act of kindness and empathy, and it just makes other people feel seen, heard, understood, and let people know that, yes, I see you, I get your struggle, and I'm here for you. I'm an ally. And that's all anybody wants, really. So that's what I champion. I champion allyship because even if you're marginalized and, oppressed in so many other ways, I'm sure there's an aspect of our identity which is dominant over someone else. And you can use that to lift up someone else's voice. So we're not hypocrites, right? If we're asking for allyship and support and all of that, then we should do it too. So yeah, that's the core ethos.
Thank you. I love that. And, it really doesn't take much, does it, to just call it out and say, it's not appropriate, mate, or whatever
No.
terms you want to use. I'm just wondering, like, what's your background and how did you get to be doing what you're doing today, which is so inspirational?
Oh, wow. So that's a big question, and I will sum it up for you. So as far because as I can remember, I always felt and remember feeling outcasted, an outsider, feeling that I have to hide my authentic identity for fear of rejection or worse, violence, you know, criminalization, whatever it may be, or even at worst, death, just because of who I am, So in certain places I've been to, I've been targeted just because of the color of my skin. In certain places, I've experienced discrimination just because of the my sexuality, right? So as far back as I can remember, I've always remembered a part of me that tried to suppress himself. Don't be authentic. Fit in. Be invisible. Be quiet. Don't show them who you are. And I lived with this for so long. And what it does psychologically is it suppresses our nature. And as a psychologist, I am now aware that anything of our emotions or our thoughts or our feelings that we just try and suppress and we don't actually work through, it's a recipe for unhealthy negative emotions, poor mental health, trauma, all sorts of stuff. So as I was going through my 20s and my teens and all of that, I lived a very traumatized life. There was no self-loving, there was no self-acceptance, because those things are things that we need to experience from our external first. Unconditional loving acceptance. We get it from our primary caregivers, secondary caregivers, and tertiary caregivers. And if you're not feeling that or experiencing that, then how do you internalize that for yourself? So I went through my 20s and even my early 30s, still trying to grapple with that, you know, figure out how can I accept myself with so many flaws and become happy and thrive in this world rather than just trying to survive. And it came to me in an invite from friends because friends see you. And sometimes we become blessed in life if our relatives who we share the DNA with, who actually don't owe us anything, don't give us that, then we go out in the world and we find chosen family. And I was so blessed that I found them. And they were like, Jarell, you're such a good speaker. You're such a good listener. You're so profound in your feedback. You're always so helpful. You're so empathetic. You're so understanding. And at first I was like, oh, whatever, whatever. And then after a while, I was like, actually, yeah, I am. I am. I am. I am. And they're like, why don't you try an introduction to counseling course? And I was like, I will. And here we are.
That's amazing. So that's how Bempong talking therapy came about.
Yes,
How long have
yeah.
you been doing that?
So about 9 to 10 years now. So it's almost a decade I've been in the field, and it's been an enlightening and challenging experience as well in that sense. Like coming from having my own mental health issues, my own trauma, and now being able to name my trauma, I'm aware that it wasn't only my trauma. I had my childhood trauma. Everyone does to an extent. But apart from that, I had to battle with historical trauma and racial trauma and intergenerational trauma and trauma around my sexual identity
I'm just
and trauma around my neurodivergency. So it's an uphill struggle, but again, through that, it gives you the awareness and the language and the experience to help other people who are experiencing a similar kind of nuance trauma that they need someone to really understand it and feel it, to hold their hand and guide them through it, letting them know that it will be okay.
And that's so true, because we do all have our own traumas and we've all been through different difficulties in life, etc. And you talking about culture consciousness, that's so interesting, because I think there's a real fear of approaching people and getting to know people that we think are different to us.
Yeah.
And actually, when we actually start talking to them and asking questions, you're right, we might not be the same sex, we might not be the same skin color, but there might be other attributes that are the same. Like you say, you could find out that you're both dyslexic, or you've both got a condition or an illness that you're dealing with, or whatever
Exactly.
it is. And then suddenly you have that connection.
Commonality, you're like, oh, we're not so different after all. And it's about finding that commonality, looking for the common threads. As human beings, we have different experiences, different backgrounds, different genetics, different geographic location. So the differences are apparent. Yes, we're all different. I'm different from you. You are different from Marissa. We're all different in that sense. But we can find commonalities, though. Why don't we spend the effort to look for that? The differences are so apparent. I mean, no one needs to tell us our differences, right? It's very clear to see, right? No one needs to state it. It's obvious. It's like stating the obvious. Like, why say that? Why say it? I can see. You don't need to tell me, but let's dig under that and see. Maybe we have different commonalities there. And that's where we bond, and that's where we see ourselves in each other, and that's where we don't other people or alienate people, because then we find empathy. People only treat people in such an exclusionary or marginalizing way when they have zero empathy for them.
Yeah, I love that. And obviously in the maternity sector, you've got all sorts of different cultures and people's backgrounds that are trying to access healthcare. And sometimes certain presumptions are made and misconceptions are made. So why do you think people from certain cultures don't access healthcare? I know the Black and brown skin community find that quite hard.
Yeah, I mean, it's very nuanced, right? So it starts with the genesis of healthcare treatment, modern healthcare. So in the book, I talk about I overlap the timeline of slavery and colonialism with the timeline of modern psychotherapy. And then I do a geographic overlay as well, so that you can see where all of the fathers of psychotherapy come from. So during the time of the genesis of mental health care, right, then we had slavery and colonialism going on. So the dominant thoughts of these people in these countries, which was North America and Europe, in North America and Europe, their dominant thinking was of the time. And at the time, it was almost condoned that Black and brown people are second class humans and don't have the mental capacity to govern or take care of ourselves. So white people must do it for us. And that idea still lingers, right? In like charity adverts and stuff like that. Black people need a handout. Black people need help. They're the people that are destitute, So it creates this kind of air that, Black people can't and white people can. And that creates a mistrust amongst Black people, because we know we can. We're also doctors, we're also lawyers, we're also surgeons, we're also anesthesiologists. So we're like, so that creates a fundamental mistrust, because we know that there's a racist genesis in the systems. So it's systemic, and it's never been fully addressed. Never, ever been fully addressed. It's always been brushed under the carpet. We know it happened, but we don't talk about that. How do we expect to get resolution in conflict if is not aired out on the table and everyone is able to have their say. And both parties are able to reach a common understanding and move on from it. How is it ever going to happen? So there'll always be this mistrust until the healthcare system accepts how racially abusive they had been to Black and brown people in its genesis. You know, in medicine, Black people were experimented on without our knowledge.
What do you think schools could do to better educate our children? Because I'm just thinking, the media is so influential that you've just mentioned there. What, should we be changing education in schools to make us more aware of cultural differences?
So it would be really nice because I'm English Ghanaian, right? So I say English Ghanaian and I put English first because I'm very Ghanaian, but I'm English born, bred, and raised, and I live here. So most of my cultural identity is English. When I go to Ghana, they're like the English boy. You understand? And then when I come to England, they're like, oh, the Black guy. So I'm in an intersection there, right? And before I went to Ghana when I was about 12 for the first time I can remember anyway. And I remember when my mum said, we're moving to Ghana, I was horrified. I was like, why? Why do you want us to move to Ghana? Because my conception of what Ghana was, and even Africa in general, because I didn't know anything specific about Ghana, because they didn't teach that in school. They kind of taught us about Africa. And my perception of Africa from kind of school and history lessons and the media, what the media was showing was a really destitute, wild place, full of diseases and suffering. And people lived in huts and up trees. And I know this sounds like the stereotype cliche, but that's what I believed because that's what I was told. And I didn't have any other frame of reference because I didn't see Africa on telly apart from in a David Attenborough documentary where there's lions and gazelles and hippos and stuff like that. So I'm imagining, oh my God, I'm going into a David Attenborough documentary and I am so scared. And when I landed and we got there, I was like, it was nothing like that at all. There was no lions. I never saw any elephants. There was no tree houses. I had to actually try and beg my parents to make one and they didn't. So I used to live up in the mango tree. There was nothing like that. Yes, there was mosquitoes. Yes, it was a different culture. Yes, but it was just another culture. It was another civilization. Yes, we had been held back from, slavery and colonialism and neocolonialism and, poor economics and poor governments and stuff like that. Yes, but the people, the place was so much more vibrant and so much more diverse than I could ever have imagined, So I think schools, definitely, you need to upgrade your curriculum and show things in a true light that's non-biased, that doesn't have a colonial undertone.
Yeah, I think it's so deep rooted in our history. And I say history lightly because it's actually not even, all the atrocities that have taken place aren't even very long ago. It's like part of our current. And this, unlike other aspects of society, has just been kind of like swept under the carpet. It's not treated the same. And
yeah.
I think to your point around, cultural consciousness and getting to know people. I mean, it's just so powerful when you get to know people on an individual level. Like I know us three look very different. Well, we look very different to you, Jarell, and I really want you to be my friend. Immediately I get your energy and nothing else matters.
Yeah, because we see commonality in each other, right? We can connect on other aspects of our humanity because we're aware that we're multifaceted, right? And if one facet, we don't have to have exactly the same facets in order to get along. That's
Yeah.
I
crazy.
know you like dancing as well. We should go dancing.
I love it. To me, it's a spiritual experience. So let's go and have that spiritual experience together.
I'm in. I like dancing too. I'm not particularly good at it, but I'm like first on the
You
dance
don't have to
floor.
be. You don't have to be. It's just being your authentic self to the music. That's what it's about.
Especially after a couple of glasses of wine.
Yeah.
So, how can we be more inclusive? And what's the language we should use? Because part of being with the healthcare professionals, all the
Mm,
reports that I read and statistics, etc., they all mention the word BAME.
mm.
But what is the current language that we should be using at the moment?
This is always so interesting because the language always changes. And to be honest, a lot of Black and minority ethnic people don't like the terminology like of BAME and BIPOC and all of that, because what it does is it takes Black people, which is like a whole continent and a whole diaspora, and and lobs us into one lived experience, you know, and then it takes other minority ethnics who are from completely different cultures and lived experiences and lobs them in with us as well. So it kind of like and it's the same with even the LGBTQIA plus. My experience is not the same as a trans woman's experience or a trans man, as a gay man, as a Black gay man. Is it a completely different thing? So I think sometimes when we dilute those kind of broad brush and amalgamate, you know what I mean, marginalization and discrimination and strife and struggle into one big suffering group, it just kind of minimizes the nuances in the challenges that they face and the nuances in the solutions that that we must come up with. And that's why intersectionality is so important. And that's why cultural consciousness is important. Because even under these broad umbrella terms, there's so many nuanced cultures in there that we can't just do a one size fits all. Oh, this will work for BAME people. You know what I mean? This will work for women. So no, this will work for Black people. No, it doesn't work for that. It's the it has to be a slightly more nuanced, more granular. You know what I mean? That's the difference between equality and equity. Equality means doing a mental health program at work. Equity means doing a culturally conscious mental health program at work, where you give people what they need and don't just give everybody a general thing, because some people need other things and some people don't need it at all.
Completely agree.
Yeah.
What do you think? Can you give us some, I guess, some ideas as to what people can do differently from like tomorrow?
So I always say it's in the small things. So I gave the example earlier that I don't need to go and throw myself in front of a horse at the Royal Ascot to be a feminist. You know what I mean? But it's doing the little things like crossing the street, like saying, that's not cool. You can't do that. All right, don't speak to her that way. Leave her alone. And not being afraid to do it or asking a question. I'm wondering, I noticed you didn't say anything when that happened, but I'm wondering how you felt about
Mm.
that, if it bothered you at all. You know, it's asking questions. By the way, I'm not sure of how I've seen your name written, but I'm not sure how to pronounce it. Do you mind pronouncing it for me? Oh, it's Kwabena. Oh, okay, because I couldn't pronounce the KWA bit. I didn't know how that sounded out. Where's that name from, actually? Actually, the traditional Ghanaian name is from the Ashanti tribe, and it means Thursday born boy. And the female counterpart of my name is Abena. So there's really 14 names in the Ashanti tribe. And then you become a little bit more culturally conscious, right? Because you ask the question and the person
Yeah, I
feels
think that's
seen.
it with, yeah, I think names are really, really important actually. And I know like whenever I do any work, I make sure I can like pronounce everyone's names properly and spend like ages, like double checking.
Rehearsing
And
it.
people are cool if you get it. Yeah, people are cool if you get it wrong as well. And you're trying and you're like, it takes a few goes.
Right.
But I think people shy away from doing it
The key word
just
is
because they're scared of
trying.
getting it wrong.
The key
Yeah.
word is intention.
Mm.
I
What
met
is your
someone
intention?
I met someone last weekend actually, and he was just beside himself that I repeated his name back perfectly. He was so shocked. He was like, "Oh my gosh, no one has ever got my name right, ever."
Yeah,
It was
yeah,
Jacobo. And
yeah.
I said it back to him, Jacobo, and he was like, "Wow,
Yeah,
oh my gosh." And then he just like followed me around the
yeah,
rest of the
yeah,
evening because
Yeah.
he thought it was
yeah.
amazing. But
Because
it's
what
so
does that
important to
communicate?
try. Yeah.
It communicates acceptance. It communicates that I see
Mm.
you and I hear you, and I respect you. And who doesn't want to gravitate towards that? Who doesn't want to be around
Yeah.
that more? Yeah, I mean,
I know.
everybody wants that.
And you see like lots of people just adapt, which also they shouldn't be expected to do. So lots of people are like, oh hi, I'm Jacobo, but you call me Dave, and you're like, wait a minute, that's not
Like, why?
Because it's so exhausting sometimes
yeah.
to explain it over and over and over again, especially in a culturally unconscious environment where it ends up being something of ridicule. So when I was growing up as in school, I my name was written Kwabena Bempong Jr., and that was the name that was on my registration in school. But because people saw Kwabena, they turned it into Ribena because they couldn't be bothered to pronounce it. And then it became something to tease me with. And then it became something that traumatized me. And then I started thinking maybe if I had a generic white name, then I would stop being teased and maybe I'll be accepted, So you start going by the name Junior instead because it's easily
Mm.
pronounceable. And then you reach the age of 28 or 30, and then you realize that actually I'm a senior and I'm no longer a junior. So how am I going to deal with that? So it's trying to fit in and stripping yourself of your cultural identity. My name has so much culture tied to it. I just told you a cultural story just from my name, you know, and if
Mm.
I stripped it and was too embarrassed to say it because of the trauma of being teased about it and the unconsciousness and the insensitivity of people not even trying to make the effort to pronounce it properly and ridiculing my name, which has so much cultural importance to me and so much pride, then what am I going to do? I might think of calling myself John Smith.
Don't do that. You've got a beautiful name. Don't do that.
But you see the pressure. Sometimes you're like, you know what? Life has given me too much problems. I'm really dealing with racism. I'm really dealing with homophobia. I'm really dealing with my dyslexia. I don't need to deal with my name again. I'm just going to change it so it's just easier. And it's something I can change. I might as well just change that. I can't
My
change my skin
son
color.
My son has the same problem actually. He's about to turn 13 and his name is Tobiah Lysanias. And we chose that name because it means the goodness of God drives away sorrows.
Mm,
His younger brother was stillborn, so he's got this very special name. But his friends tease him; they can't quite pronounce it right. Teachers call him Tobias, and he's like, "No, I'm not Tobias. I'm Tobiah." And if they want to know his middle name, then people just come out with lasagna. So, so he's just known as Toby sometimes.
yeah. And
Because
kids
he
can be
just
so
thinks,
mean, right? Kids
yeah,
can be so mean because they're unaware, so they just
Mm.
say things and they find things funny, but they don't realize the impact it has on someone for seeing themselves and accepting themselves and being their true authentic selves. And that begins the trauma of a really long road of, compounding issues. that we have to
Mm.
kind of work through when we're adults, which is so, such a waste of time, right?
So how do you think the NHS can be more inclusive? Because they must deal with so many different people.
Yeah, so in the NHS, I can speak about the NHS from like the kind of mental health practitioner aspect, and even as a patient in the NHS as well. So from the mental health point of view, throughout all of my training as a mental health practitioner, and I did a few different diplomas and courses in it, and every single one, I was 1000% the only black, gay, dyslexic guy. 100% the only black gay guy. Always, if anything, the other black person, but the other black person will be a woman because there's more women in the field than there are men. So I was always some sort of enigma in my classes. Now, if we're speaking about the topic of cultural consciousness and being aware of our own cultural identity and the interplay with someone else's, and in the field, we don't see people within our own culture that we can identify with. How the hell are we going to get
Mm.
accurate, successful therapy? We're going to have higher dropout rates, lower success rates. We're going to spend most of the therapy session explaining ourselves, our cultural nuances, and our cultural background to the more than likely middle-aged white woman therapist, right? Who is a middle-aged white woman and maybe knows nothing about what it means to be a black, gay, dyslexic man.
Mm.
So even though she's a therapist and well-meaning and well-intentioned, it needs to be more nuanced than that. Otherwise, you'll always miss the mark, always miss the mark. So the disparities in Black mental health and the uptake in Black people in healthcare and mental health care and all of that is the lack of representation. If you don't see yourself, you don't think you belong. So there's this old trope that Black people say that therapy is a white people's thing. It's a middle-aged white people's thing. I mean, middle-class white people's thing, or it's just a white people's thing. And I'm a Black therapist, and I maybe agree, because there was none of my identity in the curriculum. There was none of my identity in my peers. By the time I qualified, I hid behind a logo because I was afraid no one was going to hire me because I just couldn't see myself in my tutors, in the people running the faculty, the council faculty. When I saw of the fathers, there was no representation. So I'm like, who the hell is going to hire me? You better hide behind the logo if you want to get some work, you know? And it was only after I overcame, that racial trauma that I'm like, you know what? I'm going to be a Black therapist for Black and cultural minority people and show my big face all over my website and all over the internet and on the back of my book and just put my face out everywhere I can because I hid it for far too long. Because how are people going to identify with it and say, no, therapy is for Black people too? If there are Black people saying, hey, hi, I'm here.
Mm-hmm.
I won't be a lighthouse, I'll be a black house. And I'll call all minorities, we be black, gay, rainbow, everything. I'm here. I get you. I get your cultural nuances. I get what you experienced trying to look for healthcare or mental health care. I get it. I get it. I experienced it. But it doesn't have to be that way.
That's so powerful. You just mentioned your book. Tell us about your
Yes.
book.
So it's called White Talking Therapy Can't Think in Black. A punchy title, I know, but it's exactly what I spoke about. So throughout, in my first experience of therapy, I experienced, and at the time I couldn't name it, but now I've got the vocabulary. I experienced microaggressions and racism in the therapy room, which was the most unexpected place. So I remember in the first therapy session, after our check-in, and this was a white middle-aged therapist female called Holly, right? So I was like, oh, but at the time you don't think about this. You just think, is she a nice person? Can we connect? You know what I mean? You just think of those generalized things. Those things like, oh, maybe do I feel comfortable sitting with her? Is she qualified? Is she, registered? You think of those things. So I sat in the room really up and raring to go, overcome all the kind of cultural stigma that stopped me from going to therapy or seeking help in the first place. Like we don't like the mistrust or thinking it's not for us or the underrepresentation or the lack of education or the lack of community outreach. All of that are things that the healthcare system needs to take care of that. But I experienced none of that. So stepping into the therapy room, I was super anxious. But I was like, I need to qualify as a therapist. And this is the only barrier getting me there. And even though my whole being is telling me you're not supposed to be doing this, because in Ghanaian culture, you don't talk about your personal issues, especially if it's got to do with your family, to anyone else. Because we're a communal living structure and there's no idea of an individual. You are part of a family, which is part of a tribe, which is part of a clan, which is part of a country. There's no individual there. So I had to overcome all of those, mental blockers that most cultural minorities have to go through, in order to step into the therapy room. And then once we did our check-in and everything, she asked, oh, Jarell, tell me about your passion. What a question to ask me when I've just found it and I've been searching it for so long. So I obviously sat up and I was like, I love psychotherapy and I've been looking for it for so long and it took me so long to find it. And now I'm understanding, where my trauma comes from and I'm able to help people. And I realized that I have a skill of active listening and paraphrasing. And I realized I'm really good with words. And I was like that because no one had ever asked me such a question like that before, right? And I noticed Holly just chilling into her seat and listening to me. And obviously, I went into a massive monologue. And then when I landed, she was like, Jarell, I sense aggression from you. Right, right. So I was like, no, 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 Holly, I'm not aggressive at all. It's just that when I get excited, I talk with my hands and I gesticulate. And no one's really asked me a question like that before. So I really wanted to express myself and I got really excited. And I really don't want you to think that I'm aggressive and I don't want you to feel afraid or worried about me. And then luckily the session ended. And I left that session so deflated thinking, therapy is not for Black people. I was like, this confirms it. I was like, I'm trying to become a therapist and I experienced this. So therapy is not for Black people. To compound the issue, when I got home, I had an email from Holly saying, I can no longer work with you and here's the refund for the next session and pick it up from reception the next time you're here. So this is not isolated to me. I found that this is common practice. And not only in mental health care, where we're supposed to be the most empathetic, the most non-judgmental, the most caring, the most understanding. And look at what happened. And that wasn't the only time it happened to me. It happened to me multiple times to try and seek therapy. It happened so many times. I only ever had successful therapy when I was about 36, 4 years ago. Can you imagine?
Honestly, I'm speechless, but I can believe that happens on the regular. So many people, like you said, but I'm so grateful that you do what you do, and I'm really excited about reading your book. Just for this conversation is like a real teaser for me, and I can't wait to get into the detail. The fact that you've overcome so much hardship and you've turned it into something so positive to help other people is just amazing.
I've got a beautiful metaphor for that I'm going to share with you guys. And do you guys ever watch Game of Thrones or any kind of medieval things with a dragon in it?
You know what? I think it looks like Heidi's the same as me. I think we're the only two people in the world that haven't watched Game of Thrones. And my husband all the time. He's like, start again.
Okay, any
things, but not that
any cartoon or movie or anything with a dragon?
Yeah.
Okay. So the dragon always guards treasure. It's always a huge, magnificent beast, right? ancient and wise and has powerful wings and scales of steel. And there's always a protagonist going to try and slay this dragon. So dragons are like those challenges I experience, like racism in the therapy room, or homophobia, or sexism, or misogyny that you may face. These are all dragons. But what I've learned is that you don't slay a dragon. Are you kidding me? What a wasted resource. They breathe fire. They've got wings. They guard treasure. They're ancient and wise. They're huge. Why would you slay such a magnificent beast? A really patient, you know what I mean? A really patient trainer can tame that dragon. And then that dragon will bow and let you jump on his back and ride it. And when you ride that dragon, it will breathe fire for you and it will take you where you need to go and it will whisper that ancient wisdom in your ear and illuminate your path for you. So you don't select.
Thrones to Avatar.
Oh, yeah, there you go. It's metaphors in movies, right? But it's real. You know, we don't attack or fight. We create allies. We bring on side. You know what I mean? You don't kill it. You understand it. You be patient with it. Learn how it works. And eventually it will lower its head and allow you to climb on its back. And it will take you on an amazing journey. And that's what I do. I go about my life slaying dragons, and I help my clients and people who I work with to also slay their dragons. So eventually, we have a fleet of powerful beasts working on the same cause of mental well-being, diversity, equity, equality, and inclusion for everybody, you know? And I think that's what it's about. I think it's not about fighting. You know, the core tenet of what I teach is allyship, you know, and it's forgiving ourselves and others.
Wow, that is so powerful.
Oh,
God, that's huge. Thank you so much. Like
you're welcome.
I'm beaming. Isn't that the perfect world to live in?
Yeah, tame your dragons,
Mm.
ride them, and they give you a really fun ride. I mean, look at me. I stand in my truth and I say I'm a black, gay, dyslexic man. This was like a lump in my throat that I could never verbalize. But look at my life now and what I do. I use these things that were the bane of my life. You know what I mean? That I thought that made me think I'm not good enough, or not acceptable, or invisible, or not worthy, or not lovable, right? All of these things through society and the way society viewed us made me internalize these thoughts. And when I finally decided, no, no, this isn't right. I'm not gonna live my life like this, you know, and I'm gonna be patient. I was like, I understand that I'm a minority in this world, but I'm gonna be patient, you know, and learn to love myself from the inside out. Like RuPaul says it the best. If you can't love yourself, you can't love anyone else, right? And it's the same in cultural consciousness. If you can't see yourself and your cultural identity and your own cultural nuances, then it's impossible for you to see someone else. Then you become culturally unconscious. And that's what brings rise to bigotry.
So true.
Thank you so much. I've been inspired, and I'll take your messages of allyship and dig deep and think about where I can do more. This conversation's been amazing.
Thank
Thank you so
you.
much, Heidi. Over to you to close.
I've learned so much, Jarell. I've got so much to think about. I can't wait to listen back to this and make lots of notes. It really is inspirational, and it just shows you, just the little things can
Just a
make such a
little.
difference to people. And actually, we don't need to be fearful of the difference
No.
because there's actually similarities and connections that we can make with people, and we can learn from each
Yes.
other and be allies.
As long as we dig, if we ask questions, remember, a therapist has nothing but powerful questions. right? Therapists don't give advice. We don't tell people what to do. We don't lead. We don't do anything. We just ask powerful questions. Now, if that's a therapeutic tool to get to know someone on a deeper level, I think it's applicable in the real world. Don't be afraid to ask questions. It makes people not feel invisible. It makes people feel heard, accepted. You know what I mean? Interesting. You know, it makes people actually start to see themselves because a lot of us feel quite invisible in this world when you feel marginalized and discriminated against. So when someone takes the time to ask you a question, and not just a generic question like, oh, how you doing, mate? You know what I mean? Oh, I see you're wearing these beads. Where did you, what, you know, tell me about them. Where are they from? You know,
Yeah.
oh, someone says, oh, I'm from Kenya. Oh, what's the capital of Kenya? What's the main food that they eat there? You know, maybe go on holiday there once instead of going, you know, it's just being a bit more, I'll go to a Kenyan restaurant, you know, and try the food or learn how to say hello. So in Ashanti, my language in Ghana, hello is eti sang, eti sang. So whenever I meet someone and they know I'm Ghanaian, but we haven't really interacted before, and they say eti sang, oh my God, I'm blown away. It feels so amazing that they've taken the time, and I can tell they're not from my culture because maybe they're white or Asian or something. And they're like, oh, you're Ghanaian. Oh, your name is Kwabena, Thursday born boy. At saying, I'm like, what? Are you kidding me?
Blows you away. Yeah, because they made the effort.
It's so nice. It's so nice. So please let us not be so afraid to ask questions. You know what I mean? And just take the time. Even if he said he pronounced the Etisane wrong or the Kwabena wrong, I'd still be as equally chuffed because he tried. He made an effort.
Definitely.
You know what I mean? Or they'll ask me, they're like, Jarell, do you think Ghanaian jollof or Nigerian jollof is the best? Now, jollof rice is almost like an Indian biryani. And there's like wars in Africa over who makes the best one because it's like a continental dish we make. And there's this long running battle between Ghanaians and Nigerians of who makes the best one. So when someone outside of those two cultures says, come on, who makes the best one, Ghanaians or Nigerians? You're like, what? How do you know? How do you know about that beef between us two West African Anglophone countries? How do you know about that? It just is so heartwarming. You know, so it's the little tiny things, crossing the street, learning a phrase, you know, inviting me to a Ghanaian restaurant. I'm like, you're inviting me to a Ghanaian restaurant. Okay, let's go.
I love it. Just such little things can make such a huge difference and be so impactful.
It does.
I love it. I've learned so much, Jarell, and thank you so much for your time. Good luck with the book because it
thank you so much.
Awesome. It really does. Yeah, I've learned so much, and you're such an inspiration. So please continue doing the amazing work you're doing.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate you guys having me on today.
To follow you on LinkedIn.
Yes.
Just one last quick question.
Yes.
Where can people find you?
So you can find me on LinkedIn at Jarell Bempong, also on Instagram at Bempong Talking Therapy Limited. Also my website, www.bempongtalkingtherapy.com. So I've got a YouTube channel. So wherever on social, I'm out there. And if you just type my name or Bempong Talking Therapy, you'll see me come up. So please follow and like and share, and let's get the message of cultural consciousness, allyship, and mental well-being and togetherness for all.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
See you soon, hopefully.
Take care.
Bye.